Biographical Bytes from Bala, Laurel Hill West Stories number 50 from mid-November 2025. Basketball and Laurel Hill.
That are covered with thorn. Who are these names I keep? Who are these names I keep? Who are these names I keep? Who are these names I keep?
Welcome to the mid-November 2025 50th episode of Biographical Bytes from Bala, Laurel Hill West Stories. Laurel Hill West is an historic and active cemetery in Bala, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. I am Dr. Joe Lex, retired professor of emergency medicine from Temple University, amateur historian, volunteer tour guide, volunteer podcaster. I am recording this on November 12th of 2025. Little bit of background. Laurel Hill West opened in 1869. It's across the river from its sister cemetery, Laurel Hill East in Philadelphia, about 3 miles upstream. It's more than twice as big as Laurel Hill East, has a totally different feel and a strikingly different population. Laurel Hill East I think of as a Victorian cemetery associated with the Civil War. I think of Laurel Hill West as an Edwardian cemetery that's associated with the Great War, although there is a mixture of all of those elements at both cemeteries. Like Laurel Hill East, it is open 365 days a year, now from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Lots of parking on the grounds, at the business office just off Belmont Avenue, or at the conservatory and the bell tower. If you come in off Belmont, follow the road that has a white line in the middle. It'll take you right to the bell tower. Another possibility is to just come in while you're walking the Kinwood Trail. All right, let's get started. This month's Biographical Bytes from Bala is about early days of basketball, back when it was still 2 words. Ellwood Rutschman, basketball's first professional referee and an early publicizer of the game, is buried at Laurel Hill West, along with Charles Kid Keinath, the basketball team's second coach, Artie Kiefaber, who was the third coach and remains the namesake for the Most Valuable Player award, and then there is Lon Jourdet, who took Penn to several national championships and won more games than any other 20th century coach, yet he is nearly a forgotten man today. Well, let's get started. Basketball and Laurel Hill. Ellwood Rutschman, Charles Kid Keinath, Artie Kiefaber, and Lon Jourdet. The original handwritten copy of the Emancipation Proclamation, the executive order that freed all enslaved people in the rebel states that was issued by President Lincoln in 1863, is in the National Archives. The next year, 48 printed copies were signed by Lincoln and Secretary of State William Seward, and they were sold for $10 each to raise money for the Sanitary Commission, a forerunner of the Red Cross. Now, for an unskilled laborer, $10 was about 2 weeks' wages. Half of those copies disappeared. Of the remaining 24, 14 are in museums or other public institutions. 10 are in private collections. In the summer of 1964, almost exactly 100 years after Lincoln and Seward autographed it for charity, Robert F. Kennedy purchased a copy for $9,500, and he hung it on the wall of his 1840s mansion in McLean, Virginia. Now, in 1964, the average American household annual income was $6,600, but Kennedy earned $35,000 as Attorney General under his brother John, where he had been a vigorous enforcer of civil rights. Now, jump ahead 56 years. 2010, RFK's copy of the Emancipation Proclamation is on the block at Sotheby's Auction House in New York City. It's kind of an odd sale. There are only 4 items up that day. 3 of them are paper, but the 4 items brought in $11 million. The appetizer, Bob Dylan's original handwritten lyrics for the times they are a-changin'. Those went for $422,500. Next up, the non-paper item, a tattered swallowtail-shaped 13-stripe, 35-star American flag that had been recovered from the field after the Battle of the Little Bighorn, the only flag not captured by the Native American tribes. That fetched $2.2 million. And RFK's personal copy of the Emancipation Proclamation went for $3.8 million. That was a record for a presidential document and an appreciation value of 10% per year over 56 years. The big ticket item that day, $4.3 million, a slam dunk for the University of Kansas when one of its graduates snagged a 2-page typewritten document that hung for a few December days in 1891 in a YMCA gymnasium in Springfield, Massachusetts. The original 13 rules of basketball as dictated to a secretary by its inventor, James Naismith. There is no popular sport whose origins can be so accurately identified. Like a modern-day Martin Luther nailing his demands to the Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany, James Naismith nailed his rules to the gym door on December 21st, 1891. Before that date, there was no such thing as basketball. After that date, the sport of basketball existed. It's that simple. After that fateful 1891 day, basketball quickly evolved from a simple indoor activity to one of the most popular sports worldwide. As with any competitive game, the need for impartial officials, or referees, arose almost immediately to ensure fair play, interpret the rules, and maintain order on the court. In the very first basketball game, played at the International YMCA Training School in Springfield, Massachusetts, Dr. Naismith himself acted as the sole official. He watched the game, enforced the basic set of 13 rules he had created, and ensured that players adhered to the spirit of fair competition. The original rules were simple. The game was played with a soccer ball and peach baskets used as goals. The gym was incredibly small, 50 feet by 35 feet. Now compare that to the courts today, which are 94 feet by 53 feet. And this 1,500 plus square foot area was occupied by 18 people. Definition of referee: simply one to whom something is referred, especially for a decision or settlement, an arbitrator. The initial role of the referee was basic: call fouls, determine if the ball was in or out of bounds, keep track of the score. There is no standardized uniform for the referee or for the players, and the officials often stood on the sidelines, blending in with the small crowds. As the game spread rapidly across YMCAs and colleges in the United States, the need for consistent officiating grew. There were no formal qualifications to become a basketball referee in the 1890s. Instead, individuals were selected based on their understanding of the game's rules, which were still being developed and adapted. Familiarity with the original 13 rules written by Naismith was essential. Often, the referee was someone who had attended meetings or demonstrations where the game was introduced, or who had read about the rules in early publications. These early referees did not have distinctive zebra-striped uniforms we've become accustomed to. They wore street clothes or whatever was available. As the sport professionalized, striped shirts and whistles became the norm, aiding in the visibility and the authority of the officials on the court. In particular, the whistle became a crucial tool for stopping play and drawing attention. There's a website called thewhistlegallery.com. It spends a lot of time examining the evidence for the superiority of a tube-shaped whistle versus the escargot or the snail-shaped whistle. Also, conflicting stories abound as to the earliest uses of the whistle in a sporting event. British inventor Joseph Hudson is credited with, quote, designing, inventing, coming up with a whistle for a football event without any proof, and then repeated in various forms ad infinitum. It appears to snowball from there. The only date of consistency named is a game in 1878 at Nottingham Forest, and a reference to a whistle being used there. However, sporting events had been in play for many years prior to that. Indeed, there are dates 1860, 1868, 1878. All of these dates abound all over the internet for this event as a significant date in sporting and whistle history. In other words, we don't know when the first whistle was used. We don't know who used it. We don't even know what it looked like. As word spread from Massachusetts about Dr. Naismith's invention, people started to put teams together. One of the first recorded games between two college teams occurred in West Philadelphia, November 22nd, 1894. Drexel Institute of Art, Science, and Industry, now simply known as Drexel University, faced Temple College, now known as Temple University. Drexel won the game, which was played under rules that allowed 9 players per side, among many other variations from modern basketball. Final score, 26-1. The first intercollegiate match using the modern rule of 5 players per side is often credited as a game between the University of Chicago and the University of Iowa in Iowa City, Iowa, January 18, 1896. The Chicago team won the game 15-12 under the coaching of a familiar name, Amos Alonzo Stagg. He had learned the game directly from James Naismith at Springfield YMCA. However, there are some sources that say the first real 5-on-5 intercollegiate match was 1897 between Yale and Penn, because although the Iowa team that played in Chicago in 1896 was composed of University of Iowa students, it reportedly did not officially represent the university. Rather, it was organized through a YMCA. By 1900, the game of basketball had spread to colleges across the country. The first recorded intercollegiate game between women took place between Stanford University and University of California at Berkeley in 1896. Player distribution, positioning, and responsibilities were overall probably closer to soccer than to modern half-court basketball. Box scores for basketball, 2 words, also started to appear in the newspapers in 1896. It showed teams consisting of 3 guards, 3 centers, and 3 attackers. Gradually, the teams pared down to 5 players per side. The name Ellwood Charles Rutschman started to show up in Philadelphia newspaper box scores in the 1890s, first as a player and then as a judge or a referee. He was a Central High School student who had decided to become an expert on the rules of the game of basketball and a referee for its plays. Players used a soccer ball in those first basketball games at the Springfield YMCA. 3 years later, Naismith contacted A.G. Spaulding and Brothers and requested that the factory produce a new ball specifically designed for his sport. Early Spaulding basketballs consisted of 4 leather panels with a rubber bladder inside, and the new ball was 4 inches larger than the soccer ball which had been used. The original rules barred running with the ball, no dribbling. Peach baskets served as goals. The ball had to be retrieved after every basket, either by climbing a ladder or poking it with a broomstick. Games were often 9 versus 9, primarily because there were 18 students in Naismith's class. 5-player teams became standard by 1897. Initially, you couldn't even pivot. Players interpreted no running to mean both feet had to stay planted. In 1893, this changed. Players were explicitly allowed to pivot on one foot without it counting as traveling. Now, this simple clarification made the game less awkward and allowed ball handlers to swivel and find passing or shooting angles. Basketball was a passing game. Bouncing the ball on the floor was not part of it. Now, that began to change in 1897 when the Yale team started to dribble as an experiment. See, the rules didn't forbid bouncing the ball. They only said a player couldn't run while holding it. Yale's coach explained that loophole. If you bounce the ball as you move, you're not technically holding it. Now, this caused a stir among officials of the day, but they wisely decided to allow dribbling. Early dribbling was rudimentary. That laced leather ball bounced erratically, especially when it hit on the strings, so it was used sparingly. By 1901, a rule formally allowed a player 1 bounce, though they then had to pass. Shooting off a dribble came later. And in 1909, continuous dribbling and shots off the dribble were finally permitted. This transformative change opened the door to a more dynamic individual offensive game rather than only slow ball movement. So 1909 is that dividing point. Suddenly, they could dribble and they could run. Other early changes improved the structure of the game. In 1895, standardized backboards were introduced after players noticed fans could interfere with shots on goal. Initially, they were wire mesh and then wooden, but by 1909 again, glass backboards were approved so spectators could see through them. Originally, when the ball went out of bounds, possession was a literal scrum. The first player to grab it could inbound. This led to many chaotic scrambles. In 1914, rules changed so that the team who last touched the ball loses possession out of bounds, as is universally known today. This greatly improved the game's flow and safety. No more fights for the ball off the court. Now, Naismith's original rules had a peculiar foul system. If a team committed 3 consecutive fouls, the opponent was awarded a point. That's to discourage excessive hacking. Free throws were introduced in 1894. Originally shot from 21 feet away, and any player could be designated to shoot for a teammate. Now, this led to teams using specialized free throw shooters. By 1895, the free throw line moved closer to the now standard 15 feet. It wasn't until 1924 that this rule was changed to require the fouled player to shoot their own free throws, eliminating the tactic of sending in a sharpshooter to the line in someone else's place. Early basketball also had a version of a foul limit. At first, a player was ejected after 2 fouls until the next basket was scored. This temporary disqualification was later replaced. In 1911, the personal foul limit became 4, and by 1945, it was set at 5 fouls for disqualification. The NBA later adopted 6 fouls. These foul rules evolved to keep roughness in check while not too harshly penalizing incidental infractions. Other rules about goaltending, timer clocks, evolved as the game's players grew bigger and faster. By the late 1930s, basketball had evolved from a static, rugged game into a faster-paced sport with dribbling, defined fouls, rules to keep the action moving. Coaches learned to teach zone defense, which proved superior to man-on-man. But the biggest evolutions were yet to come, spurred by the dominance of towering centers and the need for a more exciting wide-open style. It is unlikely that Dr. Naismith would notice more than a passing resemblance to the game that he invented 135 years ago. Basketball started to make incursions into the newspaper sport pages by 1892. There's a classic article by a reporter named Albert May. It was published in the San Francisco Call Bulletin with the misleading headline, "Girl Ball Kickers." This is 1892. The language is of the time, as you would expect, rather appalling. So let's dive in. 9 of the best-looking co-eds are limping about the State University grounds covered all over with bruises, and 9 pretty little maids covered all over with glory are wasting their pin money on arnica and court plaster in Miss Head's fashionable seminary in Berkeley. All right. Parentheses, author's note. Okay. Pin money. That term actually dates back to the 16th century, when metal pins were very expensive, and a wife might actually have to be given a small allowance in order to buy pins. How about that? The plant Arnica montana, or wolfsbane, was long used in folk remedies. It is now recognized as not only unhelpful, but harmful. All right, back to the newspaper report. Mr. McGee, the instructor in physical culture, is responsible for it all, for it was he who, at an unguarded moment, introduced to his fair lady pupils the latest Eastern fad called basketball. The Berkeley students of the girl kind are fin de siècle and eagerly grasp every opportunity to be in the swim. Okay, fin de siècle, there we go. Literally means end of the century, and it was a very common term in the 1890s. Why did it fall out of favor? It would have been perfectly appropriate to call the 1990s fin de siècle, but instead we called it the millennium. Maybe that term will come back this century. All right, back to the article. Besides the great fuss the university boys have late been making about their prowess on the football field has been galling to the girls, and they have got into the habit of shrugging their shapely shoulders and turning up their little noses with an air of superiority whenever some hero of a scrimmage, a run, or a touchdown boasted of his deeds. The co-eds were just dying for a chance to show that they were as nimble and as athletic as any sophomore that ever wore a plug hat. Narrator's notes, a plug hat is what we would now call a top hat, maybe even a stovepipe hat. Instructor McGee innocently gave the girls that long-hoped-for chance when he arranged 2 clothes baskets, one on each end of the gymnasium, the other day. He produced a leather ball weighing about 6 pounds. What? 6 pounds? Yikes. And divided his fair pupils in physical culture into 2 teams of 9 each. Now, ladies, this game is called basketball, and it consists of 1 9 trying to put the ball into one of those baskets, and the other crew doing everything possible to prevent the accomplishment of the feat. The side that succeeds in basketing the ball the greatest number of times is the winner. It all looked very simple at first, and the demure little damsels quietly and lamb-like picked up that leather sphere and landed it easily home. But there was a merry and mischievous glitter in many of the lustrous eyes of the Berkeley beauties as they listened to the instructions of Mr. McGee. With the keen perceptions so often noted in the female mind, the girls set it an opportunity for great fun and chances to undo the besetting football players of the other sex. They never said a word, but like the cunning little minxes they were, they held some secret meetings and formed a team of 9 of the most athletic and nimble kickers among the university co-eds. And then they set a challenge to the girls of Miss Head's seminary, who had also learned all about basketball from Mr. McGee. Now, the Head girls are smaller in size than the most diminutive co-ed, but they're awfully plucky and would not be bluffed by any crowd of university students for a whole carload of caramels. A match game was quickly arranged. Yesterday was the day when it was played. I saw that game, and I am decidedly glad that I did. Such an aggregation of female loveliness and such a liberal display of the human form divine I have never hoped to be allowed to witness. It was grand, gorgeous, bewildering, immense, in fact, quote, out of sight, end quote. Okay, this required research. Did he really just say out of sight in an 1896? Yes, he did. The term out of sight, this is a very early usage. It's in quotes. The online Green's Dictionary of Slang gives the first example of using the term out of sight from the prior year. So it's legitimate in 1896. All right, back to the article. Imagine the scene. The gymnasium, the University of California. On one end of the big hall, 9 of the handsomest, best-shaped, loveliest co-eds in the whole world. They were dressed or costumed in blue bath suits with gold ribbons. At least I, in my ignorance, thought they were bathing suits. But somebody told me since that they were gymnasium costumes. Well, I don't care what they call them. I wish all the girls I know would never wear any other costume, for they beat all the fashions I ever saw. At the other end of the gymnasium were 9 cute little misses similarly attired. They were small and short, but oh my, never mind, I'm not going to give away all I saw. Pretty soon, the game commenced. The co-eds won the toss and got the ball first. Now, throughout this article, the term co-ed indicates female college students, co-education, but it's always in quotation marks. And that also indicates this was a new term for many newspaper readers. They might have been encountering this term co-ed for the first time. Now, as far as coin flip, I mentioned that the co-eds won the coin toss. Coin flipping was known to the Romans as navia aut caput, ship or head. That's because the coins they used had a ship on one side and the head of the emperor on the other side. Now, coin flips before sporting events became common sometime in the 19th century. It's like the whistle, though. There's no record of where this first occurred, what sport was involved, etc. So we'll just have to say that coin flips and the whistles happened probably in the early 19th century. All right, back to the article. They all got together into a bunch and tried to hustle the ball into their basket. But the head girls were on the alert and threw themselves in a body against the enemy. There was a scrimmage, and I almost betrayed my presence by the eagerness with which I watched the proceedings. For I nearly yelled with delight when I saw those 18 pairs of shapely feet kicking at each other and at the ball, and those 18 divinely formed maidens wrestle and struggle with each other like Roman gladiators in an arena. My sympathy was at first with the head girls. I suppose it was because they seemed so small, because it looked like they had no show at all with their big antagonists. They did not need any of my sympathy, as I soon found out, for they held their own in great style, and they landed the ball first with triumphant yells. The captain, who was called Jenny, was a perfect wonder. She was here, there and everywhere, stepping and jumping over and on top of everybody, having no eyes or feeling for anything but that leather ball and that basket. Like a perfect little fury, Jenny, with her disheveled hair and disordered wardrobe, fought, scratched, and kicked until that ball was safely inside the basket and the head nine had scored one. And then came a short pause. Hairpins were brought into requisition, damages to the bathing suits were temporarily repaired, for although there was no male person supposed to be in the gymnasium or nearby, the girls found it necessary to cover up some places in their costume where during the rough and tumble little pink flesh sports had made their appearance, peeping through rents and tears in the blue tights. "Oh, isn't this lovely?" a blue-eyed, dreaming blonde co-ed cried, with her eyes dancing with fun as she pulled up one of her long stockings and tied it to the trunk of her suit. "It beats anything we ever had," answered a dark-eyed beauty whose long hair had become loosened and was hanging luxuriously over her shoulders. "Time for the second round," somebody shouted, and there was a bid scramble for position at once. This time the head girl started off, and pretty soon the whole crowd was in a bunch again, right in the middle of the hall, yelling, screeching, fighting, scratching away like 18 little demons. But the co-eds were on their mettle, and they finally, after a severe and protracted scrimmage, got the ball into their basket. Then there was another pause, and the girls looked more lovely than ever as their faces became more flushed with the excitement of the sport. More repairs, another try followed. With various luck, the score stood 4-4 after the 8th struggle, and my favorites, the little ones from the head seminary who were called the kids by the lofty co-eds, came out winners by landing the ball in a splendid manner. All the fair athletes were nearly exhausted, and it was absolutely impossible to find a single girl among them which did not have numerous bruises or had not sustained some slight injury, but oh, how happy they all were. "Now we have a game that beats their old football all to pieces," they said as they painfully filed out of the gymnasium, wrapped in cloaks to hide their torn costumes and shapely figures from the masculine eyes, for there was a company of students drilling on the campus. That company had an inkling of what was going on in that gymnasium and surrounded the institution with a picket line of sentries while the basketball game was in progress. What a great story. January 1901. This is just 10 years after the game has been invented. Basketball, now one word, has taken over the sports pages of newspapers in the wintertime, especially in college towns that are eager for indoor activities. Page 6 of the Philadelphia Inquirer, Wednesday, January 16th. I chose this at random, January 16th, 1901. Middle of the week. Stories about recent basketball games between Burlington and Camden, Westchester versus Germantown Spiders, the Naval Reserves versus the Century Wheelmen, Banks Business College versus Friends Central School, and at least a dozen more games. The Brain basketball team of Trenton wanted to play any second team in Philadelphia that's willing to give guaranteed expenses. And everyone was anticipating the big matchup this weekend when Harvard was going to meet Yale on the court for the first time. Now, these were the days when it was rare for both teams to score a total of 50 points. Most games ended with scores in the 20s and teens. Now, that same day, and I just picked this by random, there was another article about women playing basketball. I said, well, I can't pass this up. They were playing a game at St. James Hall at 38th and Market. The paper described it as, quote, a furious one between the Philadelphia Reds and the Camden Blues, with a victory for the Reds of 5-11 in a 3-period game of about 15 minutes per period. Ellwood Rutschman was referee. Now, in addition to the rules, he had to deal with hair pulling, hair ribbon snatching that was not part of the men's game. He also was described in picking up the debris of battle, hairpins, handkerchiefs, garters, buckles, until his pockets were bulging. The familiar 5-person team of a center, 2 forwards, and 2 guards shows up in the box score. But there was Ellwood. He was refereeing a women's or actually a girls' basketball game. So these 13 rules that I mentioned, what are they? Let's stop here. We're about halfway through this. I'll warn you right now, we're about halfway through this. What were the 13 essential rules laid down by Naismith that Rutschman and others enforced? Number 1, the ball may be thrown in any direction with one or both hands. Number 2, the ball may be batted in any direction with one or both hands, but never with the fist. Number 3, a player cannot run with the ball. The player must throw it from the spot on which he catches it, with allowances to be made for the man who catches the ball when running at a good speed. Number 4, the ball must be held by the hands. The arms or body must not be used for holding it. Number 5, no shouldering, holding, pushing, striking, or tripping in any way of an opponent is allowed. The first infringement of this rule by any person shall count as a foul. The second shall disqualify him until the next goal is made, or if there was evident intent to injure the person the whole of the game. No substitution shall be allowed. Number 6, a foul will be called when a player is seen striking at the ball with the fist, or when violations of Rules 3 and 4, such as described in Rule 5, have been made. Rule number 7. If either side makes 3 consecutive fouls, it shall count as a goal for the opponents. Number 8. A goal shall be made when the ball is thrown or batted from the grounds into the basket and stays there, providing those defending the goal do not touch or disturb the goal. If the ball rests on the edges and the opponent moves the basket, it shall count as a goal. Number 9. When the ball goes out of bounds, it shall be thrown into the field and played by the first person touching it. In case of dispute, the umpire shall throw it straight into the field. The thrower in is allowed 5 seconds. If he holds it longer, it shall go to the opponent. If any side persists in delaying the game, the umpire shall call a foul on them. Rule number 10. The umpire shall be the judge of the men and shall note the fouls and notify the referee when 3 consecutive fouls have been made. He shall have power to disqualify men according to Rule 5. Number 11. The referee shall be the judge of the ball and shall decide when the ball is in play, in bounds, to which side it belongs, and shall keep the time. He shall decide when a goal has been made and keep account of the goals, with any other duties that are usually performed by a referee. Number 12, the time shall be 2 15-minute halves, with 5 minutes rest between. Number 13, the side making the most goals in that time shall be declared the winner. Those rules typed out and sold at auction in 2010 for $4.3 million. Now, before 1930, these are the other rules that were added. 1901, a dribbler may not shoot for a field goal and may dribble only once and then with 2 hands. The next big rule change, 1908-09, a dribbler is permitted to shoot. The dribble is defined as the continuous passage of the ball, making the double dribble illegal. Also, women players are disqualified when they commit their 4th personal foul. 1910-11, men are disqualified after their 4th personal foul. No coaching is allowed during the progress of the game by anybody connected with either team. A warning is given for the first violation, and a free throw is awarded after that. 1917-18, players are disqualified upon committing their 5th personal foul. That's women. 1920-21, the basket is moved 2 feet from the baseline. Previously, the player could climb the padded wall to get closer to the basket. This new rule finally put the wall out of bounds. A player can re-enter a game once. Before this rule, if a player left the game, he could not re-enter for the rest of the game. See, in the 1921-22 season, running with the ball was changed from a foul to a violation. This removed the free throw opportunity. Fouls usually involve illegal contact with another player, whereas violations are simply breaking a rule. 1923-24, the player fouled must shoot his own free throws. Can't use a ringer anymore to shoot all the free throws. And 1928-29, the charging foul by the dribbler is introduced. Lots of rules came after that. I just wanted to take you up to 1930, though. Also, initially there was a jump ball at the start of each period and after each goal, which gave a distinct advantage to any team with a particularly tall player. Professional basketball. First professional basketball league is the National Basketball League. It's been centered in Philadelphia. It was founded in 1898 and had teams that stretched from New York City to Wilmington, Delaware. Players were rumored to receive $2.50 for a home game and $1.25 for an away game. And before you go look it up, the current highest paid player is Steph Curry, Golden State Warriors. His annual salary is about $51.9 million. Let's see, 82-game season. He gets a game salary of about $633,000 per game. Ellwood Rutschman was one of the founders of this league, which debuted December 1st, 1898. Starting with a game between the Trenton Nationals and the Hancock Athletic Association at Textile Hall in Philadelphia's Kensington section. The Nationals rallied in the second half to win 21-19 in front of 900 fans. This 1898-99 season saw 6 teams in the league. 3 were in Philadelphia, the Clover Wheelmen, the Germantown Nationals, and the Hancock Athletic Association. And 3 were over in New Jersey, the Millville Glassblowers, the Camden Electrics, and the Trenton Nationals. And 2 of the Philadelphia teams folded before the end of the year. The other 4 completed the season. The Trenton Nationals won the first championship, 18-2-1. The following season was more stable for the new league. The season was divided into halves. Teams in the first half were Trenton, the New York Wanderers, the Camden Electrics, Pennsylvania Bicycle Club, and the Bristol Pile Drivers. The Wanderers joined, and only one team out of Chester, Pennsylvania, dropped out. That was immediately replaced by the Millville team, which had originally elected not to participate that season. And then it turns out Trenton and Millville had the best teams in the loop. Trenton got the disputed championship, and they won both halves of that season. The league began 1901 season with 7 teams and expanded their schedule to 32 games. Of the 7 teams, 6 finished the season. The newest team from Burlington, New Jersey, failed to compete. The other 6 were the New York Wanderers, the Trenton Nationals, Millville Glassblowers, the Bristol Pile Drivers, the Camden Skeeters, the Pennsylvania Bicycle Club, and then, of course, Burlington. And 5 of those teams finished with a record of 500 or better. 1901-02 may have been the most successful for the National Basketball League in terms of stabilities. 6 strong franchises from the prior year and expanded to 40 games. And all but 1 game was played as scheduled and no teams dropped out. And 1902-03, again a split season, 8 first-half teams. Camden, New York, Bristol, Philadelphia Phillies, Trenton Potters, Conshohocken, and, are you ready for this, the Burlington Shoepegs. Then there were the Wilmington Peaches that also joined. Lots of folks moving in and out of the leagues. I can't tell whether Rutsch owned part of one of these teams. He was certainly their go-to referee. Some newspaper sports pages riddled with box scores of local games show E.C. Rutschman as referee for as many as 4 and 5 games in one day. Professional basketball in its infancy was not integrated, but it's fair to say that it wasn't fully segregated either. Most teams were all black or all white, or in the case of the South Philadelphia Hebrew Athletic Association, SFAS, from 1917 through the late 1940s, all Jewish. It was common during barnstorming season for all white teams to play all black teams, just as with the barnstorming baseball teams. As the sport's popularity grew, it gained notice from the International Olympic Committee and was introduced at the 1904 Olympic Games in St. Louis as a demonstration event. But it wasn't until 1936 in Berlin that basketball was recognized as a medal event. Women's basketball wasn't included as an Olympic event until the 1976 Montreal Games. Basketball shoes were introduced as footwear by Spalding in 1907, but they did not obtain the name sneaker until 1917, when ad man Henry Nelson McKinney, a Laurel Hill West Summit section, who worked for N.W. Ayer & Son Advertising, Ayer is in Section 9 at Laurel Hill East, heard someone talk about how easy it was to sneak around in those plimsolls. So Mr. McKinney decided that sneakers would be a pretty good name for those. And I will do a podcast about Ayer & Son someday, because as an advertising agency, every time you heard a common radio jingle or radio ad, like I'd walk a mile for a camel, or when it rains it pours, that was Ayer & Son. So they need a podcast one of these days. Now, while Ellwood Charles Rutschman attended Penn, he not only played basketball, but he competed on the track team as a long-distance runner, and he distinguished himself in various amateur golf tournaments. He played on the basketball team, but he was never captain or coach. But by the time he graduated, he gained a reputation as the leading authority on basketball rules nationwide. He is actually responsible for guiding the sport through its tumultuous early days in Philadelphia. He mentored not only its first players, but its first fans, and set the tone for future generations. After his years at Penn, he was instrumental in forming the National League. Then he served as a referee throughout its entire existence. When he got sick with tuberculosis and had to travel out west in 1910, the Philadelphia Inquirer opined that, quote, every basketball rooter, player, referee, and manager in the city, suburbs, and country either knew Rutschman personally or by reputation, and everyone wishes him a safe and successful journey, and for a quick recovery of that very important essential to human life, health. Unfortunately, the tuberculosis was too much. Rutschman died prematurely in 1911 in his 30s from tuberculosis. One of his former refereeing partners reminisced about harrowing tales from the early days when basketball more resembled rugby, and the referees often had to scoot out of town quickly to avoid tar and feathering after a relatively close game was decided. They were chased to more than one train station by fans of the opposing team. Despite that trip west, Rutsch died of the effects of tuberculosis at his residence, 2047 North 13th Street. That location is now part of the Temple University campus. He received full Masonic burial rites with 4 pallbearers from the Masonic Lodge and 4 from the Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity. Sigma Alpha Epsilon was founded in 1854. It's the only antebellum fraternity that was founded in the American South that still exists. Among his other fraternal organizations, the Consistory of the Scottish Rite, St. John's Commandery of the Knights Templar, and he was a member of the ancient Arabic order of the Nobles of the Mystic Shrine, the AAONMS, also known as the Shriners. There's no record of a marriage or a long-term partner. He is buried immediately next door to rat catcher Lou Bossel, whom I talked about in a prior podcast. His marble stone is almost melted and barely legible, but the family vault has a granite cover with the family name Rutschman in bold letters. Now, when I started to work on this podcast about a week ago, I only knew about Rutsch. But when I emailed Laurel Hill West historian Rachel Wolgamuth, she reminded me of Lon Jourdet, an early coach. So I looked into the coaches, and it didn't take long to determine that during the first quarter of the 20th century, Penn had only 4 basketball coaches: Russell B. Smith, Charles Kidd Keinath, Arthur Artie Kiefaber, and Lon Jourdet. The last 3 are all buried at Laurel Hill West. So I emailed the archivist at UPenn. I asked for additional information. I did the same with the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Massachusetts. And after 3 or 4 days, I heard nothing in return. So everything you're about to hear comes from newspapers and the web. Russell B. Smith, I got nothing. I got nothing. He's listed as a coach from 1905 to 1909, and the team was the Eastern Collegiate League champion 1905-06 and 1907-1908. In his last year as coach, his captain was Charles Kidd Keinath, who then took over as coach for the 1909-10 season when they went 10-10. Their high score that year was 39 in a February 2nd game against Villanova. Charles Keinath was born in 1885, and he acquired the nickname Kid along the way. While he was a student at Central High School in 1904, he was elected as manager of the baseball team in his junior year while he was studying in the German-Spanish economic track. He also acquired skills at this now maturing game, basketball. And while at Penn, he was unanimously elected an All-American and was then elected unanimously to be coach. He'd led the league in scoring the prior years. He especially shone in the 1907-8 season when Penn won 22 straight games, including a 16-15 squeaker over Columbia in which Kidd Keinath scored all of his team's points. Oh, and I didn't mention he quarterbacked the 1909 National Championship football team also. In a 1916 Philadelphia Public Ledger article, reporter Ralph Morgan places Charlie Keinath as, quote, the greatest player of the college game. When the other team had the ball, Keinath immediately became a guard. He was the best defensive player I've ever seen. Keinath taught the Intercollegiate League the value of the foul point by developing foul throwing to its highest point of efficiency. He taught the league the efficiency of the dribble. He developed the dribble to such an extent that it pretty nearly wrecked the game. And what happened was Keinath had mastered the two-handed dribble to the point that the rule makers literally changed. He's one of those people that the rule makers had to change the rules for. No more two-handed dribbles. Kidd Keinath stayed active after his coaching days. In 1920, he was back in football when John Heisman was chosen as Penn's head football coach. He took Kidd Keinath as one of his assistants. In 1931, Penn hired him onto the coaching staff as a scout. Keinath was elected to the Helms Foundation Basketball Hall of Fame in 1957. The Helms Foundation is an historical organization that honors the early days of basketball. In retrospect, it's looked before the NCAA and weekly ranking polls to determine who should have been top-ranked, All-American, etc. back in those early days. There was a 1924 article in the Philadelphia Inquirer where the reporter said, Charles Kidd Keinath, 09, who will be remembered as one of Penn's best quarterbacks and possibly the best basketball player ever turned out by the red and the blue. The official trainer that year, by the way, was the legendary Lawson Robbie Roberts. I talked about him way back in All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 64, one of those early episodes about Olympians. Kidd Keinath was interviewed by the Pittsburgh Sun-Telegraph in March 1942, and he complained about the state of the game. Now, I don't even know why they call it basketball. I don't know what it is, but it isn't basketball. I don't go to games much anymore. I can't stand it. I get a funny feeling in the pit of my stomach. To put it bluntly, it makes me sick. Kid Keinath died at his home in Drexel Hill in April 1966. He's buried in the Hanover section of Laurel Hill West. After Keinath, the next coach was Keinath's classmate and teammate Artie Kiefaber. Also played beside him on the football team, and they'd gone to Central High School together and become fast friends. They're right next to each other in the alphabet. Arthur Blaine Kiefaber was born in Pennsylvania in 1884, one of 10 children to Peter William Kiefaber, 1854-1920, and Anna Rebecca Rice, 1854-1921. When he reached university, he played on the Penn basketball team for 4 years, including their legendary EIL champion season when they went 24-4. After they lost 2 of the first 3 games, they ran off a streak of 22 wins before they lost the last 2 games of the season. Some of those victories came across lesser opponents like the York YMCA or the Johnstown YMCA, but they beat Columbia, Princeton, and Swarthmore twice each that season. Kiefaber was considered one of the top defensive guards in the country, and much of the team's success was due to his play. Artie coached UPenn to 2 sub-500 seasons before he departed. In 1918, he was playing with the local team, the Naval Aircraft 5 in the Shipyard League. He coached several Penn freshman teams, basketball and football, and was inevitably a spectator during the team's biggest showdowns. In 1928, Philadelphia was shocked to read that Artie Kiefaber had died suddenly at age 44 in Lakewood, New Jersey. Several years earlier, he had injured his knee, and it aggravated him throughout his life. The newspaper reports that he'd been hospitalized with a heavy cold when, quote, spots resembling blood clots began to appear on his body. All right, the retired physician comes out here. Probably petechiae, which are caused by platelet difficulties. They show up as an early sign of sepsis, other coagulation difficulties, possibly the discoloration associated with meningococcemia. I need more details, whether these were petechiae, whether these were ecchymoses, whatever else they might be. Anyway, he was buried out of his father's home, 2227 Tioga, and in the Bryn Mawr section of Laurel Hill West. At the time of his death, he was in the real estate business in the Victor Building at 10th and Catherine. He was survived by his widow Stella, 2 sisters, and 3 brothers. Artie was also a member of the Board of Managers of the University Athletic Council, and Penn still awards the Kiefaber Award each year to its most valuable basketball player. Lon Jourdet, 1888-1959, the face of early Penn basketball. And that brings us up to the 1914-15 season with Lon Jourdet, who had been captain under Kiefaber 2 years earlier. He was now coach at 26 years old. Lon would stay as Penn coach for 23 non-consecutive seasons, and he became the face of University of Pennsylvania basketball for the first half of the 20th century. Now, I scoured the internet. I hoped to find an autobiographical sketch, maybe a doctoral thesis. I found nothing but dozens of newspaper articles and a skimpy Wikipedia page. It almost felt like something was being hidden. I emailed the archives at UPenn. I crossed my fingers, but I heard nothing. So I put what I thought were the finishing touches on this script on November 11th, earlier this morning. And then I recorded the podcast. It took me about an hour and 20 minutes. There was some on-the-fly editing, some double-checking along the way. I figured I'd be able to trim it down to somewhere close to an hour. So I finished the dictation. I went to write the intro. I thought I'll check my email first. There was a note from the archives at Penn, a link to an 80-megabyte, 29-page file on Jourdet, including a personal letter from Jourdet that explained his departure from Penn. Pure gold. When Jourdet's biographer comes along, the Penn archives will be the place to start. Lon Walter Jourdet was born in Crawford County, Pennsylvania in 1888 to Burton Milton Jourdet and Margaret Eleanor Jourdet. He attended high school in Du Bois, Pennsylvania, and came to Philadelphia to attend the University of Pennsylvania, class of 1912. He was vice president of the freshman class and a member of Sigma Alpha Epsilon, as well as a member of something called Phi Kappa Beta. Not Phi Beta Kappa, Phi Kappa Beta, where he served as, and I kid you not, Mother Superior. The picture with this, they are not in drag. There are 5 guys. They're dressed in street clothes for this Phi Kappa Beta. When I try to research this, put Mother Superior and Phi Kappa Beta into Google, I get nothing. Everything wants to feed me right to Phi Beta Kappa. 1912, there was an article in the Philadelphia Times by Chandler D. Richter. Chandler D. Richter is a sports writer, as was his father. I think his father was founder of Sporting News, in fact. Chandler died very young of Spanish flu. He died in 1918. He's buried at Laurel Hill West. Anyway, he wrote this about Jourdet. He said, the best receiver of the forward pass playing football today. This is the title bestowed on Lon Jourdet, the Penn end, by the red and blue coaches and many other football notables. Glenn Warner, coach of the Indians, expresses this as his opinion, and so does Fielding Yost of Michigan. Against the Indians, that's the Carlisle Indians now, Jourdet played the best game of his career and in such a manner that his exhibition has been surpassed but once this season on Franklin Field. Out of the 5 touchdowns tallied by Penn against the Redskins, Jourdet scored 3 and was responsible for the scoring of another when he recovered a fumble by Thorpe on the 10-yard line. Yes, that's Jim Thorpe. Football is not Jourdet's only strong point, as he is one of the best basketball players in the college ranks, being honored with the captaincy of the Penn 5 this season. So, Lon was captain of the basketball team, 1912-13 season. He was elected at the annual banquet, which was held at Kugler's Restaurant. The Kuglers are buried in the Summit section at Laurel Hill West. I include them in the Summit section tour that I give, well, actually at the end of November. That's coming up in another week or so. By 1914, Lon was coach of the team at age 24. He served for the next 6 seasons as his roster shifted constantly as men left to join the Army and fight the Great War over there. In 1916, Lon married Mrs. Mildred Elizabeth Mollison, 21 years old, of 5508 Walnut Street. That is way out in the boonies of West Philadelphia, 5500 Walnut in 1914. Lon had met Mildred when he was a freshman. When she was Mildred Felling, she had married when she was 18, but it was an unhappy union, soon followed by divorce. A son, Lon Jr., followed in 1922, and then a daughter, Natalie, but they divorced in 1936. Lon first coached the basketball team from 1914 to 1920, turning the Penn Quakers basketball team into the UCLA or the Duke of its day. They peaked in 1917 to 20 when they went 18-2, and then 15-3, and then 24-3, giving them a 3-year run of 57-6. In retrospect, they were named Helms National Champion for both 1919 and 1920. Other sporting events from 1919, just to put things in perspective. Both the Green Bay Packers and the Decatur Staleys, later to become the Chicago Bears, formed teams. Babe Ruth set a record with 29 home runs for Boston. The Chicago White Sox mysteriously lost a World Series they were expected to win. Walter Hagen won the U.S. Open. Sir Barton was the first horse to win the United States Triple Crown. In ice hockey, the Stanley Cup had to be canceled when all the Montreal Canadiens came down with the Spanish flu. And Jack Dempsey defeated Jess Willard in what was billed as the first $1 million bout. Penn was a leader in basketball because of Jourdet. He thought about the game long and hard, especially as the rules changed and people were allowed to move with the ball. Man-to-man coverage was considered the way to play the game until Lon and a few others thought things through. By assigning zones to be covered, the defensive team could cover more of the floor and force shooters to the outside where they would be less accurate. Penn experimented with various 2-1-2 and 2-3 formations, depending on the size and the speed of their opponents. Under Jourdet's guidance, Penn became known as a disciplined, cohesive defense which stifled their opponents. Penn could switch seamlessly between man-to-man and zone, which confused the opponent's offense and dictated the pace of the game. Lon's success with Penn quickly led to others adopting his methods, as he had shown that a well-organized zone could neutralize even the most talented individual scorers. Future coaches like John Chaney of Temple took Jourdet's basics and ran with them, developing extended zones and other variations. Remember that Jourdet was coaching Penn pre-Palestra. Its jewel box of an arena did not open until January 1st, 1927. His teams are also pre-Ivy League. That didn't become an official entity until 1956. In fact, the timing of the Palestra makes me wonder if it wasn't the house that Lon Jourdet built in order to show off his championship teams. What about this Ivy League thing? Penn still celebrates Ivy Day every June 7th. Since June 7th of 1873, every graduating class from the University of Pennsylvania has placed at least one Ivy Day stone somewhere on the university campus. Each class's stone is unveiled during a ceremony held a few days before commencement, in which a sprig of ivy is planted, a tradition whose origins are lost in the early history of Penn. More than 100 Ivy Day commemorative stones are scattered across the campus. It would make a fine scavenger hunt for some adventurous souls with cameras. In 1920, Lon retired from Penn. He was 32 years old and he'd won 2 national championships. He did various coaching stints for the next decade, including a return to football. In fact, in 1929, he came within 1 vote of being elected coach of the football team, a job that went to Lon Jourdet, who was later co-founder of the Eagles with Bert Bell. He was coached back to Penn in 1930. It was as head coach of the basketball team, after it had been led the prior decade by Edward McNichol, one of 5 brothers who'd helped spread basketball across Pennsylvania in its early days. McNichol had been no slouch, as he'd picked up a pair of national championships himself. His 10-year record was 186-63. That's a winning percentage of 747, and he never had a losing season. Lon Jourdet acted in advisory capacity for McNichol's last 2 years. The Quakers stumbled through Lon's first 2 seasons back in charge. They finished 9-17 and then 10-11 before they turned in a winning 12-6 record in 1932-33, and they stayed above 500 for the next 5 years, only to fall back again in 1937-40. Lon was becoming a grand old man of basketball, even though he was only in his 40s. He did an interview with the Pittsburgh Sun-Telegraph in December 1932, in which he insisted that women should not play basketball because, quote, it is too rough for them. He says that he took football players who'd been trained on the gridiron all season and were supposed to be in the very peak of condition, who washed out after about 5 minutes on a basketball court. In 1934, Penn was back on top and won the intercollegiate championship. The Quakers let Lon's contract expire in May of 1935. He had nothing to tell the newspapers. After all, the next move is not up to me. Not to worry, he signed for 5 more years. December 14th, 1937, Lon married Mrs. Helen Haymore of Bainbridge, a graduate of Beaver College and a school teacher. She was also a divorcee, and they had no children together. In January 1941, the Daily Pennsylvanian lambasted Lon Jourdet and his system as a relic of the horse and buggy days. The front page story was inspired by a 51-24 lambasting handed the Quakers by Cornell a few days earlier. The reporter charged the defeat was, quote, the most disgraceful example of ineptitude yet witnessed. You had to see it to believe it. Now, by this time, Lon's teams had won 200 games. They'd lost 114 in his 16 complete seasons at the helm. 7 of his teams had won championships in the Eastern Intercollegiate Leagues. Nonetheless, the article pulled no punches in its disdain for the team. When the boys persisted in passing, endlessly passing, while the stands implored somebody to shoot or cut or at least try to make it look like a contest, then the cup of bitterness was really filled to overflowing. High passes, sloppy bounces, passes which sailed off into empty space seemed nothing to the disorganized Penn team. As we said before, you had to see it to believe it. Despite these complaints, Jourdet stayed on as coach for 2 more seasons, and his career ended with a winning 14-7 non-conference 1942-43 season, but it was a mediocre tie for third in the Eastern Collegiate Basketball League. His final record, 226 and 143, a .612 percentage. Only 20th and 21st century coach Fran Dunphy has won more games for the Quakers. Now, if all you read is the newspaper, you would be under the impression that the game had passed Lon by years earlier. His hidebound ways led to his being let go, or realizing maybe he had nothing more to offer, so he walked away. The packet that I received from the Penn archives disabused me of that notion. Page 28 was a typical alumni annual giving letter from UPenn, dated February 13th, 1950. Class Agent D. Carlton Brown cheerily writes, Dear Wharton classmate, we are on our own. There are 112 of us. Remember the freshman smoker, the Christmas tree celebration? If you haven't participated before, now's the good time to make it 100% for 1913 Wharton. There's a lot more in there also. There's a handwritten note at the bottom that tells Lon there's a self-addressed stamped envelope for you to return your donation. The envelope was returned with a note scrawled on the back of the plea for the donation. It was received by the alumni office March 4th. Get ready. D. Apparently you don't pay much attention to the replies from these begging letters you send out. As a consequence, I'll refresh your memory on my reply to the last one I had from you. 1. I am forever and eternally done with the Univ of Penna as to the past, present, and future regarding either graduate or undergraduate activities. 2. The severance of these ties dates from July 1943, at which time I was discharged as basketball coach by a 1913 graduate, Dr. Poop Mercer, mid-1913. That would be the athletic director, E. Leroy Mercer, who was a physician. 3. I accepted a voluntary salary cut while basketball coach, which I consider my university contribution, as I was fully protected by contract and did not have to take it. And they got full value for every cent they ever paid me, as can be judged by the basketball records since I left there. 4. Accordingly, you can count your class numbers as 111, as I certainly do not want to be included on the list. 5, which is circled heavily. You will be doing me a big favor, should you care to do so, by having my name removed from all alumni mailing lists from the university. That I would really appreciate. And then 6. Since when has it been the practice of organizations to solicit funds from discharged employees? That strikes me as rather ridiculous. Signed, Lon Jourdet. Lon must have been greatly relieved when Lon Jr. returned in March 1945 after he flew 35 successful missions with the Army Air Corps over Europe. Lon Jr. went on to become, are you ready for this, a world-class coffee taster. He became one of the world's experts on coffee. He's buried in Lancaster. Now, by now, Lon was living in Lancaster. He was usually good for some copy when the local sports columnist needed a topic. Of those that I've seen, my favorite, I think, was November 1957, when he waxed away poetically on the topic of football in a column headlined, "Football Career of Lon Jourdet Could Fill Book." I wish any future biographers good luck in finding his biographical details. Lon's end came in 1959. The term is auto-defenestration, or simply self-defenestration, the act of killing oneself by jumping out of a window. Now, the general term for jumping from a great height is autocatalysis. In mid-August 1959, Lon was admitted to the Samuel G. Dixon Tuberculosis Hospital at South Mountain, Pennsylvania, because of a heart ailment caused by TB. Monday, August 31st, Lon Jourdet plummeted headfirst from a third-story window and died of a broken neck. Dr. Warren Gedda, a medical director of the hospital, had once played for Lon as a student at Penn. In the United States, jumping is among the least common methods of suicide, usually less than 2% of all reported self-caused deaths. Jumping is the most common method of suicide in Hong Kong. It accounts for more than half of all reported suicide cases in 2006, with similar rates for several years before that. 5 days after his death, the Philadelphia Inquirer did a lovely tribute in John Dell's Time Out sports column. He pulled no punches. He admitted that Lon, quote, was a controversial figure who was criticized as a stand-patter, stuck with the old ball control set-shot game while the parade ran by him. He hated to lose worse than anybody. Lon Jourdet is immured in the Sanctuary of Remembrance on top of the hill behind the funeral home at Laurel Hill West. By coincidence, Charles Zeller Clowder, the architect for the Palestra, is buried just a few feet away in the Sanctuary of Meditation. In 2025-26, 364 schools are playing men's basketball in 31 Division I basketball conferences. All of these schools also sponsor women's basketball except the Citadel and VMI, two military colleges that were all male until the 1990s, and they remain overwhelmingly male today. University of Pennsylvania ranks as one of the 20 winningest teams in the long history of college basketball. In case you're curious, the top 5 winningest college basketball teams are University of Kentucky Wildcats, University of Kansas Jayhawks, where Naismith's original rules now reside, University of North Carolina Tar Heels, Duke University Blue Devils, and Temple University Owls, which got a head start when it played in the first 5-man collegiate game against Drexel way back in the early 1890s. In the December 1st, 2025 episode of All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 80, I'm going to tell you of the founders. At its founding in 1836, Laurel Hill was run by 4 local businessmen: librarian John J. Smith, druggist Frederick Brown, former Mayor Benjamin Richards, import specialist Nathan Dunn. And the architect, John Notman, was also involved early. He is buried at his own cemetery, as are Brown, Richards, and Dunn. I'm going to dive into some of the earliest writings that I can find about the cemetery to tell you of its beginnings and its founders. I'm going to try to keep everything from before 1850. I don't know how much luck I'll have doing that, but I'm going to give it a try. Mid-December, Biographical Bytes from Bala, Laurel Hill West Stories, will be about minstrel shows and Laurel Hill. They are rightly condemned today. Minstrel shows were an incredibly popular form of entertainment in the pre-vaudeville days. There were dozens of troupes that crisscrossed the country, performing in blackface with exaggerated dialects. And alphabetically, between Campbell's Minstrels and Christie's Minstrels, there was the Philadelphia-based Carncross Minstrels, which lasted for several decades. Many famed performers, both black and white, got their starts with these minstrel shows. I will talk about Carncross and other minstrel performers in the mid-December episode. Minstrel shows continued until at least the 1950s. I'm going to say the early 1960s in many parts of the United States. I'm embarrassed to say I remember going to my church basement sometime in the 50s and watching minstrel shows that both of my parents were involved in. My father was an end man and my mother was a wench. For upcoming activities and tours, go to the website, laurelhillphl.com/events. I have 2 general tours coming up. Next weekend, in fact, if you're listening as this is released. I'm giving a general tour at Laurel Hill West on Saturday the 22nd at 10 a.m. It is an introductory tour. It depends on how many people show up. If 2 or 3 people show up, and they've been to the cemetery before, we might just wander around and see different things. But if you're there for the first time, I'll give you a good solid tour of a lot of the important people that are buried there. And then I'm back the next day to give a tour of the summit section at 1 p.m. That Biographical Bytes from Bala is on, Saturday the 22nd is at 10 a.m. Yeah, and then the next day at 1 p.m. I do the Summit section. Summit is the area behind the conservatory. I've got a lot of people there that I really like. For one thing, the Strawbridges and the Clothiers are buried there. That's the Drinker family plot. There are 8 people in the Drinker family plot that have Wikipedia pages, and I talk about them plus 2 others that don't have a Wikipedia page. So there's lots of good people to talk about in the Summit section. Emily Drinker, if you are listening, Emily, get your family together and come out. I will give you a special Drinker plot tour. If you know Emily, tell her that I want to give her and her family a special Drinker plot tour on Saturday the 22nd. All right. The book, All Bones Considered, 52 Laurel Hill Women, is now available from Amazon and from the gift shop. From the gift shop online, you can get it. And I'm doing one more author event. If you need a last-minute Christmas gift, this book would make an excellent Christmas gift for a young woman, especially one in high school or college, looking for women role models. That's what this book is all about. I'm doing an author event at the Phoenixville Library on December 18th. So come by, talk to me. I'll sign a copy of the book for you. All Bones Considered and Biographical Bytes from Bala are mostly researched, written, narrated, and produced by me, Joe Lex, retired professor of emergency medicine from Temple University, volunteer tour guide, and volunteer podcaster for both cemeteries. You reach me, my email, jrlexjr1947@gmail.com. The theme song, Names at Peace, is by local artist James Harrow. Maybe, just maybe, I'll see you on a tour. Stay safe, stay well. This is kind of exciting. I got an email, actually Grace found this for me. I've told you before about Grace Carson. Grace does publicity for me. She's the one who puts together all those little film clips that I used for promotion. She manages my Instagram and TikTok accounts, which I visit maybe monthly. Just let her run it. And then she'll say, you have 700 views on such and such. Oh, okay, good. That's good to know. Anyway, Grace found out that All Bones Considered was chosen by FeedSpot. FeedSpot is an online database service, a media database service. We are the top history podcast in Philadelphia, according to FeedSpot. That's nice. That's nice. And Peter, if you're still listening, you were ranked also, but I'm number one, Peter. Peter Schmitz does the Adventures in Theater History, Philadelphia, which is a superb podcast, by the way. I highly recommend it. And Peter and I trade jabs back and forth about the podcast. So anyway, it is now the top history podcast in Philadelphia by this group, FeedSpot, and I am pleased to say that we passed 80,000 downloads last week. So the podcast is doing okay. It's in the top 25% of all podcasts, the top history podcast in Philadelphia, and 80,000 downloads. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting Laurel Hill. Thank you for supporting Friends of Laurel Hill. Stay safe, stay well, and stay above ground. Bibliography up next. Couple of articles on early basketball. I gleaned some information from A Victim of Reform, Why Basketball Failed at Harvard, 1900-1909, by Mark Horger. That was from the New England Quarterly, March 2005, volume 78, number 1, pages 49 to 76. City of Basketball Love, Philadelphia and the Nurturing of Black Males' Hoop Dreams. That's by Scott N. Brooks. The Journal of African American History, Volume 96, Number 4, the special issue, African Americans in the History of Sport, Fall 2011, pages 522 to 536. Our Myth of Creation, The Politics of Narrating Basketball's Origin, by Yago Kolas, from the Journal of Sport History, Volume 43, Number 1, Spring 2016, pages 37 to 54, from the University of Illinois Press. I did review Muscular Christianity by an article, ironically, written by Mikhail Mishurkovich, Muscular Christianity, Christian Roots of American Sports, and it is from what? Looks like it's freestanding. Springfield College and Luther Gulick. It talks about how muscular Christianity fed into Naismith's basketball creation. Remember, he was a minister, and basketball was almost created as a religious. I didn't talk about that because it really wasn't Philadelphia-based. But if you're interested, I can send you a copy of this article. Once again, Muscular Christianity, Christian Roots of American Sports. Lots of newspaper articles on Rutschman, on Keinath, and on Kiefaber. And for Lon Jourdet, it was all articles and frustratingly incomplete until I got that tranche of papers from the archives at the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you again. 29 pages of useful information about Lon Jourdet that helped fill out his life very, very nicely. So thanks to the archives for that. And is there anything there that I want to share? No, it's all wait a minute. What's this? Oh, yeah. Lon wrote an article. He wrote a book. There's a copy of his book online from archive.net. It is called Modern Basketball. Now it's only one word, by Lon W. Jourdet, head coach of basketball, University of Pennsylvania, and Kenneth A. Hashhagen, head coach of basketball and track and instructor at Ursinus College. W.B. Saunders, Philadelphia and London, 1939. So that's the book he wrote about basketball before he took over for his second tour at Penn. Okay, again, thank you for listening. Stay safe, stay well. Maybe I'll see you around the cemetery. Stay above ground.